You are live.
Thank you. Good evening and welcome to a virtual meeting of the City of Dublin Planning and Zoning Commission. The Ohio legislature passed several emergency laws to address the pandemic, including the ability for public entities to conduct virtual meetings. We appreciate the ability to maintain our continuity of government and are holding our meetings online and live streaming to YouTube until further notice. You can access the live stream on the city's website. We welcome your comments on cases. In order to submit any questions or comments during the meeting, please use the form under the streaming video on the city's website. Your questions and comments will be relayed to the Commission by the meeting moderator. Please provide a valid name and address when submitting your comments and refrain from making any inappropriate comments. We want to accommodate public participation and comments to the greatest extent possible, and we appreciate your patience. At this time, please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. We'll pause while the flag is displayed. If you could turn your video off and your audio on.
I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everyone. Ms. Beal, thank you for joining with us tonight. Could you please call roll?
Certainly. Mr. Grimes?
Yes.
Mr. Supelak?
Yes.
Mr. Fishman?
Yes.
Ms. Call?
Yes.
Ms. Kennedy?
Yes.
Mr. Schneier?
Yes.
And Ms. Fox is excused because she has a meeting conflict.
And we appreciate the double hats that Ms. Fox wears. She's on council, a council mission this evening, so we will excuse her and wish her all the best. I am looking to the Commission now for a motion to accept the documents into the record and approve the minutes from January 21st, 2021. I'm assuming everyone has had an opportunity to review. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Grimes. And a second?
Yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. Ms. Beal?
Mr. Schneier?
Yes.
Ms. Kennedy?
Yes.
Mr. Fishman? Mr. Supelak?
Yes.
Ms. Call?
Yes.
Mr. Grimes?
Yes.
Thank you again, Ms. Beal. The Planning and Zoning Commission is an advisory board to City Council when rezoning and platting of property are under consideration. In such cases, City Council will receive recommendations from the Commission. In other cases, the Commission has the final decision-making responsibility. Anyone who intends to address the Commission on any of these administrative cases must be sworn in. The agenda order is typically determined at the beginning of the meeting by the chair. The rules and regulations of the Planning and Zoning Commission state that no new agenda items are to be introduced after 10:30 p.m. There are no cases that are eligible for the consent agenda this evening. For any of those who are here for cases this evening, anyone intending to address the Commission on any cases this evening, could you please turn your video on and raise your right hand and answer in the affirmative. I'm going to pause. It looks like we have a couple more. Nikki, can you confirm that everyone is present?
Yes.
Thank you. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in your testimony to this Commission?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone. All right, this evening cases 1 and 2 will be heard together. I will read both cases into the record. Anyone with audio on, if you could mute, we will proceed as follows. Meadows Academy at 6065 Memorial Drive, case 20-163 AFDB with minor text modification, that's the amended final development plan, and case 20-150 CU for a conditional use. The first application is a request for a minor text modification as part of the amended final development plan to add daycare, child or adult, as a condition within the Muirfield Square center located 600 feet south of the intersection of Memorial Drive with Muirfield Drive and Zone Planned Unit Development, Muirfield Village. The second application, 20-150CU, is a request for conditional use for an early childhood learning center designated as daycare, child or adult use within the Muirfield Square Center. Zach, it looks like you have our case presentation this evening.
I do. Give me one moment to pull this up. Perfect. Well, good evening, commission members. As stated, there will be, this application is for consideration of two separate applications for Meadows Academy. The first of which being an amended final development plan with text modification, and the second being a conditional use following the text modification for a daycare use. Highlighted on the screen is the Muirfield Square office complex that is located within the Muirfield Village Planned Unit Development District. This site is full of office condominiums that are located south of the intersection of Muirfield Drive and Memorial Drive. But specifically for this application, at least for the conditional use application, Lot 4 of the Muirfield Square development will be up for consideration. This lot is located in the eastern portion of the site and does have access primarily off of Muirfield Drive. It does have two access points directly to the southeast into parking lots that are located on this lot with ample parking. The development text for this lot, as well as the remainder of the Muirfield Square development, allows for uses consistent with the neighborhood commercial zoning district and the zoning code. Some of the uses that are listed within this within the zoning code text within the zoning district are general retail, personal services, and office uses. The development text also lists out specific uses such as art studios, bookstores, and sporting goods stores, to name a few. Daycares are currently not permitted, nor are conditional uses within this district. So as it stands, this would not be a permitted use. However, the future land use plan that overlays this site is designated for a mixed-use neighborhood center. And within this designation, daycare uses are considered as appropriate for this within this designation. So the applicant is requesting a amended final development plan with text modification to allow for daycares to be conditional uses. What this means is that any use that would want to come here would require a conditional use application should the text modification be approved. To speak more towards the conditional use of Meadows Academy, Meadows Academy provides full day and half day preschool and daycare preschool uses for children ages 6 weeks to 6 years old. The facility would be open Monday to Friday and will operate between 9 and 4 p.m. with drop-off starting at 7:15 a.m. and aftercare runs running until 6 p.m. The applicant has indicated that they intend to employ upwards of 6 staff members and project to enroll maximum of around 59 students. This would require parking counts to be 16 parking spaces for this use based upon the employees that would work here, as well as the projected student count. The applicant has also intended with the amended final development plan screened outdoor space that would not be a playground. However, staff is recommending that the applicant continue to work with staff to meet the requirements of the suburban office district that enlists requirements for outdoor spaces that would be adjacent with daycare uses. Planning staff has reviewed this application to the minor text modification criteria, and staff has determined that it does meet the criteria, as the use is consistent with the recommendations of the community plan, and it does not appropriately impact the density of the development, nor does it impact negatively the permitted and conditional uses that are allowed at this site. Staff has also reviewed this application to all applicable amended final development plan criteria and conditional use criteria, and are recommending approval of all 3 of these requirements. The first being the minor text modification to allow for the daycare child and adult use to be a conditional use. The second would be the amended file development plan with one condition. And the third would be the conditional use following the amended file development plan with no conditions. I would be happy to answer any questions that the commission may have tonight. Otherwise, the applicant is here to answer any questions or concerns you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Zach. And who from the applicant is here with us this evening?
I'm here.
Susan, was that you?
Yes, that's me. I'm not sure if you could hear me.
Yes, Susan, thank you and welcome. Did you have a presentation or would you like to make a statement to the commission before we start with questions?
I think that Zach covered everything thoroughly, so I have no further comments.
Thank you, and again, welcome.
Thank you.
All right, looking back to the commission for questions for staff and the applicant at this point. Mr. Suplak.
Hey, Zach, and maybe this is just a clarifying question. Do we always approve child daycare and adult daycare in the same approval, or are they sometimes separate?
So the zoning code specifies daycare as child or adult, so it's included in the same context, and that designation also includes early education, preschool, and so this would be mixed into that daycare use that's defined in the zoning code.
Got it. Okay, so it's a standard definition as far as we're concerned.
Correct.
And forgive me, maybe I just missed it. There's an advocacy for potential outdoor space, which we're not necessarily seeing. Could you rehash through that real quick?
Certainly. So we had discussed with the applicant in previous months their desire to have an outdoor space, not to be a playground, but just a space to be shielded to contain kids to be outside. Any type of fencing or playground equipment would not be permitted here, but that intended use would be to put up potentially a row of shrubs just to kind of screen an area for kids to be outside supervised.
Got it. Thank you.
Any other questions from the commission for either staff or the applicant? Mr. Schneer.
Yeah, and I'm not sure, let me know if I'm not, if I'm spinning here, figuratively, not literally. I am familiar with that development. In fact, I think that was the exact address of my offices for 8 years, about 10, 12 years ago, in that building. My question is the outdoor, there is no, all the outdoor space is common area, is my understanding. Whether it's relevant or not, I'm just curious what the applicant had in mind, or Zach, if you've had any discussions, how that works in that condominium setting.
Right. So each condo is there. It's split up into separate lots. It's not all one gigantic. Each lot is separate from each other, and it would be required to meet specific setbacks that would be listed as well. I know the applicant has talked with the Muirfield Association as well as the condo association there and has received preliminary approval. It would just require additional approval from staff to move forward with anything outdoor.
Okay, thanks, Zach.
Any other questions for staff or for the applicant? All right, we'll continue on to discussion. Interjecting first, Zach, just to make sure we have not received any public comment as we've been discussing.
We have not.
Thank you. All right. Ms. Kennedy, do you want to kick us off this evening?
Sure. Thank you, Ms. Call. I have seen very few daycare centers that don't have outdoor space, but I think that maybe has been addressed in Mr. Hounshell's previous comments that if the proposal should come forward, they would have to work with staff to ensure that it's done in a way that's acceptable and approved. I'm just surprised to not see an outdoor space as part of this plan. So my question for the applicant is, was that a consideration coming into to this application, or is that a future consideration that's on the table for future discussion potentially?
Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you, Susan.
Thank you for asking that question. When we applied for this AFDP and conditional permit, it didn't occur to me that we needed a separate application or permission for it. So my understanding was that in our application for the permission to use the space, that it was covered. And because we're not really thinking of it as a enclosed playground, it's more like, you know, a space to come out and have the kids breathe for a while and get some fresh air. And without any playground equipment, I didn't really think that it was necessary. But of course, I'm not familiar with the protocols, and I'm very open to whatever needs to take place for that to happen. I hope that answers your question, and if not, please feel free to let me know how I can better answer it.
Thank you, Susan. I think that does answer my question. So the intention really is, the intention for this outdoor space is not to be used as a traditional playground, if you will. It's really a space that's outside that can be used for the children, but not a traditional playground.
Yes, that's a more accurate way of articulating it. I appreciate your expressing it. It's really a safe space that is landscaped, where there's like a safe place for the children to come out and have some fresh air. So in the traditional sense, you would think of a physical playground. That's not what we were thinking of. With equipment, that's what I meant.
Understood. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Sublak?
I'm all in favor of this. There's lots of residential up there. There's lots of need for daycare in that pocket. I'm all in favor of this. The future sort of consideration of an outdoor space, I think, is smart, and obviously, you know, I mean, there'll be problems if there's playground equipment brought out, but there's lots of ways to do that with daycare and kids and just getting them outside running around. So I support this.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sublak. Mr. Grimes?
Thank you. I think it is also going to be a great idea, and that mix, that neighborhood type center, that's a good addition to the area. But I can't let it go by that I'm concerned about whatever the exterior plan is. I just have a tough time thinking that the sliver of grass that's along there now could in any way be useful, and it's almost not enough room. But if you guys are going to work it out, that'll be between staff and the applicant. But I just want to let you know that I am concerned about that part. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Grimes. Mr. Schneer?
Well, I echo fellow commissioners. It's an appropriate use in my mind. I think there was a daycare center sort of across the street in that little complex on Tane Drive. So I think it is appropriate. And we're all sort of concerned about the outdoor space, and it's been addressed or will be addressed. So I think it's great, and I'm all in favor.
Thank you, Mr. Schneer. Mr. Fishman?
I echo my colleagues. I well know that Muirfield requires, after you come up with a landscape plan, approval of any landscaping or anything. They have a design review board that would do that. So I assume you're planning to get that done. Other than that, I think it's fine. I also agree with my colleague about it's not much space there. So I don't think it could be a playground with equipment, but I think that's a whole different thing. So I'm in favor. I see no problem with it. And just so it is approved by the Muirfield Association as well as staff. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fishman. And I'll just tie us out. The one call out, the age group is that 6 weeks to 6 years. So depending on the head count, you know, I know that different kids are different, but at that age, there tends to be a higher teacher to child ratio just because of the needs. And so it is always concerning, especially next to higher trafficked areas. And Muirfield is obviously one of those areas. So working with staff to make sure that there is something that is safe and accessible for the kids. Susan, to your point, just to get some fresh air, to get out of the building and really get some fresh air. And I echo my fellow commissioners that it is an appropriate use of space. And so I am in favor of the application. And at this time, Commissioner, Ms. Kennedy, yes, you have another item.
All right, one other question. I didn't realize you were going to wrap it up already, Ms. Call. Just quickly, out of curiosity, Susan, will your school be doing any busing to the local elementary schools? Meaning, would you be providing daycare busing to any of the schools for kindergarten or first grade programs?
We will not.
Will not. Okay. The reason I asked that question is if there were to be daycare buses parked permanently on site, of course, I would imagine that maybe some of the local residents may have some concerns there, but since that's not an issue, I'll let that go. But I also want to echo that I'm in support of this proposal.
Thank you.
The busing also, if that becomes a future need, turnarounds and that sort of thing would need to be considered, and staff is very used to working out issues like that. All right, Commission, I am looking for 3 motions this evening. The first, to approve minor text modification to add daycare, child, or adult as a conditional use in the Muirfield Square Center.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Fishman and Mr. Grimes. Ms. Beal?
Mr. Supalack,
Yes.
Mr. Fishman, Ms. Kennedy,
Yes.
Mr. Schneer,
Yes.
Ms. Call,
Yes.
Mr. Grimes.
Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Beal. Second motion, to approve the amended final development plan 20-163 for an early childhood learning center designated as daycare, child, or adult with 1 condition.
Move.
Thank you, Mr. Grimes.
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. Ms. Beal?
Mr. Fishman,
Yes.
Ms. Kennedy,
Yes.
Mr. Schneer,
Yes.
Ms. Call,
Yes.
Mr. Grimes,
Yes.
Mr. Supalack.
Yes.
Thank you again, Ms. Beal. And third, to approve the conditional use 20-150 for an early childhood learning center designated as daycare, child, or adult use.
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Grimes. Ms. Beal?
Mr. Fishman,
Yes.
Ms. Call,
Yes.
Mr. Supalack,
Yes.
Mr. Grimes,
Yes.
Mr. Schneer,
Yes.
Ms. Kennedy.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you again. All right. And Susan, thank you very much for joining with us this evening and sacrificing some of your evening to be with us. We certainly appreciate your time, and we look forward to having this use in the Muirfield and Dublin community.
Thank you, Rebecca, and thank you to everyone for your support. It's much appreciated.
Thank you. You have a great evening.
Thank you.
All right. This evening, cases 3 and 4 will be heard together. I will read both cases into the record. Primrose at PID 273-009-147, case 20-213 FDP Final Development Plan, and case 20-212 FP Final Plat. The first application, 20-213 FDP, is a request for construction of a 2-story, approximately 16,000 square foot daycare and associated site improvements on a 1.37 acre parcel zoned Bridge Street District Office. The site is south of West Dublin Granville Road, approximately 450 feet west of the intersection with Dublin Center Drive. The Planning and Zoning Commission has the final decision-making responsibility on this case. The second application, 20-212 FP, is a request for a final plat to establish 2 lots and dedicate 1 public right-of-way on a 3.58 acre site zoned Bridge Street District Office. The Planning and Zoning Commission is the recommending body to City Council on this case. Zach, it looks like you have our case presentation again this evening, so I will turn the time over to you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Rebecca. Good evening again. This is a request for 2 applications, the first of which being the final plat, which will receive a recommendation to City Council. The second being a final development plan for the development of the Primrose School. Shown on the screen is the Bridge Street District process for new development. This is the 3rd step in a 3-step process. Originally with the preliminary development plan, it was staged to finalize macro level site details such as building location, open space location, and the layout of the site. Tonight, we'll be reviewing the final development plan and the final plat, which is the final step in the process to receive approval of building materials, building design, landscaping, and any additional specific detail considering the building or property. This application does also include a final plat, which will receive recommendation to City Council for final determination. The final development plan will receive determination by the Planning and Zoning Commission with this meeting. And highlighted on the screen is the site in consideration. This site is located within the Bridge Street District Office zoning district and is south of West Dublin Granville Road. There are few natural features located on this site. However, there is a slight grade change from east to west, as well as an existing tree row along the west property line. Highlighted in yellow is an existing 100-foot wide AEP electrical easement, which does limit vertical development within this area on the site. Previously in November of 2020, this application did go and did receive approval of a preliminary development plan. Shown on the screen is the proposed site plan from this application. The applicant was proposing a 15,850 square foot building for a new 2-story child daycare center. With the preliminary development plan approval, a parking plan was approved for 38 parking spaces on the southern lot, and that was approved with the preliminary development plan, as well as 4 waivers that were approved. These waivers included the facade materials percentage, which is the percentage of primary versus secondary materials. The primary material number was lowered. The second waiver was the front property line coverage, which is for the building along the new neighborhood street to the east. The third was the maximum block size, which is the requirement, was a requirement with the construction or proposal of the neighborhood street. And the fourth was the vertical increments for 3 elevations of the proposed building. Along with the preliminary development plan, a preliminary plat was approved with the application, and it was approved at City Council in January of 2021. Shown on the screen is the proposed site plan for the final development plan. There are a few minor changes with the site plan. These changes replicate what was conditioned for approval with the preliminary development plan. These changes include the extension of sidewalk into Lot 2. Lot 2 is the northern of the 2 lots, extending across the heart of that lot that has been removed, and the southern fence for the playground, the boundary of that was moved to meet the 5-foot minimum setback from the side property line. The applicant is still proposing a 15,850 square foot building for a new 2-story child daycare center. The building type does fit within the loft building type designation, and the applicant is proposing a 12,900 square foot playground to the south of the building. As stated in the preliminary development plan meeting, 318 square feet of publicly accessible open space is required with the construction of this building. This number is based upon the square footage of the building. The applicant is working with staff to continue towards a consolidated open space agreement with the city. to consolidate open space that would be required for this lot and designate it or consolidate it to lot 2, the northern lot, in conjunction with the development of lot 2. Shown on the screen are the proposed east and west elevations of the building. The east elevation represents what would be viewed from the neighborhood street, and the west elevation from the parking lot. These elevations remain consistent with the approved preliminary development plan. The applicant is proposing brick and stone. The brick would be the main primary material, with the stone as a water table along all elevations of the building. And they're proposing cementitious siding as a secondary material that would also act as the trim around windows that are not storefront. The applicant is also proposing a dark storefront system with aged copper metal panels above the main entrances into the building. The applicant has also provided signage, which is for reference only. A master sign plan application would be required, or the applicant would be required to meet code for future signage of this building. And shown on the screen are the north and south elevations viewed from the access drive and the playground. Again, these elevations remain consistent with what was approved with the preliminary development plan. The applicant has provided a landscape plan for the site and neighborhood street, as that is a requirement with the final development plan. The site features a variety of plantings, including maple trees, lilac trees, and a number of deciduous shrubs and perennial plants and grasses. Following a recommendation from staff and the commission, the applicant has also provided landscaping around the perimeter of the playground fence. Also with the playground fence, the applicant has adjusted the chain link fencing that separated the 4 areas of the playground, and it will now match the black aluminum 4-foot tall fence that is around the perimeter of the playground. The applicant is also proposing 14 required street trees along the neighborhood street. However, the applicant should continue to work with the city forester to determine the final species and location of these trees along the neighborhood street. The applicant will also continue to work with staff to finalize the landscape plan for the entirety of the site. Additionally, with the landscape plan, the applicant has provided a lighting plan, and I will be using the landscape plan to demonstrate where these locations are. The applicant is proposing 20-foot tall LED light poles. There will be 5 LED light poles throughout the site that will light the parking lot as well as the access drive to the north of the site. However, due to the restrictions within the AEP easement, the applicant is required by AEP to not exceed 6 feet in height for both landscaping and lighting. So the applicant is proposing bollard lighting where the red oval is at the western portion of the site along the western parking lot. This does meet the requirement for AEP and also contributes to the requirement for foot candles, the average foot candles across the site. The fixtures for both the light poles and the bollard lights will be set to 3,500 Kelvin, and this equates to a warm white light setting across the site. Both of these fixtures will be set to the same temperature to have a consistent feel throughout the site. And shown on the screen are proposed site details additional to what has been provided. This includes a detail of the proposed benching throughout the site, as well as planters, the proposed dumpster enclosure, and proposed proposed playground equipment. The dumpster enclosure will mimic materials that are approved or not approved that are proposed with the building. However, the applicant should verify that the height of the dumpster enclosure is 1 foot taller than the dumpster that it will be enclosing, as well as the applicant should work with staff to substitute the metal siding gate for a synthetic wood gate for both the pedestrian entrance and the main entrance. And shown on the screen is the proposed character for this building. What you're reviewing is from the northeast corner as you're coming south on the neighborhood street. Finally, with this application, we are considering a proposed final plat. This final plat will split the lot into 2 developable lots with the dedication of right-of-way for the new public street to the east. Lot 1, which is the southern of the 2 lots, is 1.370 acres in size and will be developed by Primrose. Lot 2 is 1.632 acres and is located north of Lot 1. The applicant has provided a street name. However, the applicant will need to continue to work with staff to vet appropriate and approved street names through our emergency services. The applicant will also need to work with staff to provide a cross-access easement along the bordering property line for lots 1 and 2, where the access drive is, and they will continue to work with staff to finalize that prior to City Council. Staff has reviewed this application to all applicable criteria and are recommending approval of the final development plan with 6 conditions and approval of the final plat with 3 conditions. If commission members have any questions for staff, I would be happy to answer them. Otherwise, the applicant is here with their entire team to answer any comments or questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Zach. And welcome to the Primrose team. Elena, do you have a presentation or a statement that you'd like to make this evening, or anyone from your team would like to make this evening before we start with questions?
The only comment that I have, I do not have a presentation, but the only comment I have, and I feel like it was deceiving, the light fixtures that are represented on the plan that Zach shared, they will be consistent in color. The spec that we were able to find only showed a nickel finish, but it will match all other lighting on the building as well as the other poles to be a dark bronze.
Thank you for that clarification, Elena. That is very much appreciated. Anyone else from the Primrose team like to make a statement before we dive into questions from the commission? All right.
This is Jim, if I may.
Go ahead, Jim.
Upon urging from Mr. Iskander, we're continuing to work with staff on the street name. There's been no agreement with the city review yet, but we're working on it.
Thank you, Jim. All right, commission, looking to you for questions for either staff or the applicant. And Jim, could I have you mute again? Ms. Kennedy, we'll go to you first for question.
Thank you, Ms. Call. I think this is probably a question for Zach. Going back to the topic of the consolidation of open space, I guess 2-part question. So first part is, who would be responsible for the upkeep? If this is a consolidated space, would the upkeep of that space fall on Primrose initially until there's a second pickup for lot 1, like until there's an occupant in lot 1? How does that work?
So that is an excellent question. That is an item that would likely be associated with the agreement once that is settled upon. In terms of who would be required to maintain that, I personally am not quite sure right now. It looks like Ehab has an idea, and I know Nikki might be able to help us with that answer as well.
Yes. So one of the things that we've already come up with is a cross easement and a cross maintenance agreement, as well as ingress and egress along that drive between the 2 properties. And that is going to include maintenance items for the stormwater management that's going to be servicing both properties. It's going to address snow plowing because whoever has parcel 1 may not open as early as parcel 2. So those are going to be shared expenses, and then, you know, invoices will be given. The Primrose parcel is going to be the, I guess, initiating or responsible party, and bill pro rata share to the northern parcel. I also wanted to point out that if you guys haven't noticed in the landscape plan, there are common spaces like the benches and the planters along the neighborhood street. So those, I mean, that's going to be plenty for the 300 square feet required for the Primrose building. But I do agree that we need to work with the northern owner, whoever that may be, so that it doesn't feel like we have an open space, they have an open space, and there's nothing that ties it in between. So we're very cognizant of how the end product should look. We're vested.
Thank you for that response. I appreciate it. And then a follow-up for Zach. Would this be something that's common within the city where we would do this type of consolidation? And if so, is that a desirable situation for a possible lot one tenant? Or, I mean, do you have any kind of thoughts or just looking to, educate myself in this space a little bit, I think more than anything.
Certainly. So in terms of the procedure and getting to coming to a determination of consolidating open space, I know we had talked originally at the preliminary meeting in terms of what meets the intent. Obviously, there's meeting the requirements of 1 square foot per 50 square feet of usable building space. But in the events that it would not meet the intent of the Bridge Street District to be usable is when we could potentially come to these determinations of consolidating open space to where it meets the intent of the district and meets the requirements that are enlisted in the zoning code. And it is desirable for the commission as well as the rest of the district. Where this has been done before, Nikki, would you be able to maybe hop in and help me with where we've done this in the past?
Yeah, so actually, we don't really have any good examples of where we've done this in the past, and the recommendation this evening is a result of that. The Bridge Street District Code requires a very specific amount of open space for each development, which can lead to postage stamp open spaces with the incremental improvement of each site. And so the staff recommendation to the applicant, which was subsequently agreed to, was that there should be a consolidated open space so that it could be more usable and potentially more impactful, and then also have a greater number of amenities. And that would be determined in conjunction with whomever may develop the northern lot. So it's really a lesson learned how we've come to this recommendation this evening.
Thank you, Nikki, and thank you, Zach. I appreciate that. So if there are future amenities, that would be a shared cost responsibility between lot 1 and lot 2 then? Is that what you're saying?
Correct. And part of the condition requiring the establishment of a legally binding agreement between the two parties would also include that maintenance component. And, the amenities would be dictated at a future date.
Thank you so much. Question answered.
So no real difference between a shared use agreement than like a shared parking agreement. If there's a shared parking lot, then there's a legally binding agreement that says that what materials have to be used and maintenance costs. Is that a correct clarification?
Yes, that is. So the other item that would go with this legally binding open space agreement would be an exhibit. And the reason for that exhibit would be because it's not dictated on the plat. So it would kind of be a two-part item.
Thank you, Nikki. Mr. Fishman, you're muted.
Just a comment, I'm assuming they're jointly responsible because we've had experience in the past where one of the owners became non-financially responsible, and the other owner said, well, that's his problem to take care of them. So are they going to be jointly responsible? If one's out of the picture, does the other one have to take care of?
So I would defer to Thad on that. The entire, I guess, intent of the condition is to, have additional time to have the applicant propose a document and have the law director's office review the document prior to, executing or recording the document. Is that correct, Thad?
That is exactly right. That's sort of the vision that I would have for it. And of course, given that the whole intention is to have a consolidated open space that acts as a single unit, things like joint maintenance responsibility, a overall plan for the entire open space are things that we would be looking for, just because given the effort to go to this extent, we wouldn't want to have one side that is kept up and one side that isn't. It should be a continuous open space and maintained accordingly.
Thank you for that clarification. Any other questions at this time for the applicant or for staff? Mr. Grimes.
I noticed in the plat, there's some technical adjustments that need to be addressed before it's final. It sounds minor, but do you know what that is?
That is a consistent, it's really just consistency. That's a condition we have across all plat applications. If anything, with different developments, if anything changes with the layout of the site, that it would be replicated with the plat. So that's just a kind of a cleanup tool, I would say, as a condition. So I can't speak to anything directly that would need to be changed. The other conditions would be kind of those minor items, such as the cross-access easement and the street name.
Okay, and a follow-up question to Thad about this agreement. Is this something that can go with the land as it transfers, something that's part of the deed? Is that something that's allowed to be, or is that the way this would be managed? Because if the parcel changes hands, then you have to redo something if it's not on the deed already.
Yeah, that would be a component that we would look for in putting together the agreement, so that it is something where we don't have to track down a subsequent purchaser to maintain that privity of contract. But that document is not drawn up yet, but that is certainly a consideration we would have, because we want it to be something where if it is, and we've talked about this, I believe, in prior meetings, if it's a year from now or 5 years from now or 10 years from now that this second northern half develops, we want it to be able to pick up and go at that time.
Okay, thanks.
Elena, this is a question probably for you. The elevations that were displayed weren't, they're not super descriptive. And so looking at that front drop-off area near the front doors, can you talk me through what that physically looks like on the vertical plane? It didn't look like there was much of an awning, but then I saw some drawings tonight and maybe there was an awning in front of those front doors where kids are dropped off.
So I don't know if I'm allowed to share my screen or not.
Zach, could you bring up a drawing?
But I guess the best way for me to describe that is it's a very low profile canopy. And when I say low profile, we do not want any structural requirements for canopies on this building. We have a complicated structural system as is. So in order to create a slight reveal at that front door and draw attention to that front door, we are intending to put, you know, a 2x12 against the, I don't know if you want to get me, if you want me to get too technical, but it's literally going to be a protrusion of maximum 1 foot from the face of the storefront out. And again, the only reason of doing that is just articulation at that front entry facade. It's not going to necessarily have a function, or it's not going to collect snow. It's not going to, we're mitigating all of those issues that we have in Northeast Ohio, or excuse me, where are we? Excuse me, Southern Ohio. I lost track of where I was for a minute. Yeah, so we're not going to have those issues.
All right, so my asking the question was actually the opposite. It sounds like you've had some maybe weight distribution or some other issues in different locations. I was actually thinking from a pickup drop-off perspective. Ohio,
Okay.
We're not known for our dry seasons very much. If you look outside, you can kind of see that, whether it's frozen water coming down or liquid water coming down. It's nice, especially as you're pausing at a front door to maneuver the stroller in, or to collapse the umbrella to stand in a covered area where you're not being pelted by that lovely moisture that keeps us so green.
Sure. So I guess the answer there is our Primrose schools, that's the main reason why we have that vestibule in the front of the building. And you see that many times in cities that similarly are not allowed to have protrusions from the building. So, you know, we provided a vestibule as a way for someone coming from the parking lot to gather themselves their umbrellas, etc., and then enter the facility. As of right now, we have discussed awnings, and we would like to refrain from using awnings on the exterior of the building.
Thank you for that clarification. Other questions for staff or the applicant? Mr. Fishman? You're muted.
I know we approved varied exterior materials, but it seems to me that we got an awful lot of hardy plank on the building, and the building has an office-like appearance. If the use changed, it would certainly fit as an office building. And I remember the day when we didn't even allow any kind of siding on office buildings, and it seems to me that that would be the thing that would weather the worst and age the building. And it just, when I looked at this plan today, it surprised me how much hardy plank, and I'd like to see less hardy plank. The other thing, other comments, as long as I'm making them, we were talking about the play equipment at the last session, and we made it pretty clear, I think everybody did, that we wanted that playground to be opaque as far as seeing the play equipment and names on the play equipment, the color of the play equipment from the street. So I wonder if we can address those two issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fishman. Any other questions? So I'll piggyback a question off of Mr. Fishman's that I had jotted down, and well, I have two. One is Zach, and maybe Nikki for support on this one. The image that was presented tonight for the awning over the playground equipment had the logo, which in my mind, that signage. So when we're looking at things like that, are they qualified as signage and therefore subject to a master sign plan if they don't meet the standard base code?
Yeah, Nikki, correct me if I am wrong with this, but with these, and I know this was the discussion that we had at the preliminary, is that the play equipment would not be able to have the branding on it. It would need to be a blank canvas. So what was presented on those slides and the exhibits is examples that they have from different locations across the state and across the country. So that is an item that if the commission wishes, could be a condition just to have those removed from the equipment for when they are implemented in the site.
Thank you, Zach. And then there was a call out. Oh, Nikki, did you have something to add to that?
Yeah, just to clarify, we would not even need to add a condition. It's simply prohibited unless it were to be approved in a master sign plan.
Confirmed, and thank you, Nikki. There was a call out on the dumpster, that the dumpster enclosure not only be converted in material, but also be 1 foot over the lid height. So, you know, my historical brain goes back to all of the unpleasant looking dumpster enclosures that I've seen in the past. And typically speaking, it is the cover, the plastic cover of the dumpster, that when the dumpster is overfilled now sits more than 12 inches above because it's being supported by the refuse that's in the dumpster itself. Is 12 inches, 1 foot, is that the standard in our sign code? Sorry, not sign code, but you knew what I meant.
Yes, that is the requirement in Bridge Street for dumpster enclosure is 1 foot.
All right. And then as far as code enforcement, is there any call out for maintaining an enclosure or refuse that's visible from neighborhood? I'm looking mostly to those residential neighbors that will drive by this facility often.
Yeah, we do have nuisance codes in our standard zoning code, and any property maintenance requirements would still need to be maintained here. So it would be covered under property maintenance.
Perfect. Then my concern there is mitigated. All right. Any final questions before we move on to discussion? Yes, Ms. Kennedy.
I just had one final question. The playground is completely enclosed with fence, correct?
Correct. It is a 4 foot tall black aluminum fence, and it's entirely enclosed.
Got it. Okay. Thank you. Just from a safety perspective, I wanted to confirm that.
Thank you for the clarity. All right, turning time over now for discussion and statements from the commission. Mr. Grimes, would you like to start us off this evening?
Thank you. I'd like to commend both the applicant and the staff for all the hard work that's gone into this project, all the versions. And I think it looks really beautiful. I like the way the property is going to be used and prepared for sale in the front half. So I like it very much, and I want to thank everybody for all the hard work that's gone into this. That's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Grimes. Mr. Schneer?
Well, how convenient, because I echo Mr. Grimes' comments. This is a lot of work has gone into this, is obvious from both the applicant and the staff, and it's a great product, and a great job in working with a very difficult lot, the AEP easement, et cetera. So I think it's good.
Thank you, Mr. Schneer. Mr. Fishman.
I agree with my two colleagues. I think they've done a lot of work and so on. I'm still interested in the comment on the hardy plank. If I don't have any support on it, that's fine, but there certainly is a lot. And also, I don't think I got an answer on the equipment, even though there won't be any signs on it, being screened from the neighborhood.
So let's pause there. Zach, I know that the playground equipment has a fence around it. Is there a landscape plan, or is there a proposal to add landscaping around the fence to shield that playground equipment?
So there is a proposal with the landscape plan. They did add landscaping around the perimeter of the fence. I would probably lean on Elena to speak towards the specifics of the landscaping that's proposed. As I don't have that in front of me right now, she may have that at ease.
Ms. Miller?
I do have that in front of me. So the best way to answer that is we have proposed the Primrose Standard brand fence. And as we discussed in the beginning with staff, it is critical that we see out as well as see in. And that is all for childhood safety or child safety. We have complied with the requirement for this fence to be no higher than 4 feet. Generally, our perimeter fence around our playground is 6 feet tall in order to prevent non-custodial parents from, unfortunately, accessing a child that they don't have legal rights to. So given the extent of the landscape plan, I'm not sure if you want me to share it with the committee or not, but we have shrubs, native plants that go around the entire fence as well as in the front. And the way that the playground is positioned, it is on the far south end of the site for that reason. And given the plantings as well as in front of the fence and the positioning of the playground, we do not feel there is any sightline from Dublin Granville Road. And that was the main concern in the very beginning when we started to have this conversation, was more the view from Dublin Granville Road. So we have complied to the extent that our, I guess, brand will allow us. Our first job is life safety and child safety. So we fail to comply or modify the fence in any other way that would be a detriment to the users as well as the operators.
Thank you for the clarification. Mr. Fishman, did that answer your question?
Yes, it does.
Thank you. Any final comments, Mr. Fishman?
I think you've done a marvelous job. I still didn't get an answer on the Hardy plan.
I can, if you'd like. So that is something that our brand has, Primrose franchise has moved towards, actually, for ease of maintenance. They have found that the fiber cement boards are, the technology in making them have exceeded any past use of the cement board. There's longer warranties on it as well. So we have proposed the cement board as a way to kind of close the gap between an office building and a residential home. And so it's this prototype that we're developing in order to have a mixed use feel and have variations of materials. So as it relates to, I know the last hearing, we had a conversation about primary and secondary and the condition being needed for the ratios. Well, one thing that those percentages did not take into consideration was glass, was not, the windows in the storefront had to be excluded from that ratio and that percentage. So if we were to look at this facility with the high quality materials, the amount of glazing that we're providing, the variations of brick as well as stone, we feel that the fiber cement board is a way to make the facility marketable to a residential and commercial area. And we do not feel that the fiber cement board will be an issue for maintenance down the road.
Just one request for clarification, either Zach or Nikki, on percentage of primary material versus secondary material as measured by code. I'm looking in the planning report and I don't find something that nails that down.
So with I'm sorry, you're asking. With this particular loft building, we were required to have 60%, if I can bring up my notes. An average of 65% across the facade, I think it was.
Nikki, Zach, do you have code there that you could reference?
Yeah, so it's across all facades is 80%, and that was a waiver that was approved specifically for not for the specific material, but for secondary versus primary. In terms of calculating the transparency, it does disclude the windows and doors. So it excludes that in the requirement when you calculate the transparency.
And as measured, this application is what percentage?
It's different on each facade. I would need to pull up what was approved. I don't have that in front of me, unfortunately.
All right. If you could continue to look for that information, let's go on for additional comments, but I do want to come back to this item that Mr. Fishman brought up. Ms. Kennedy, do you want to go next?
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Call. I think this is a great project. One of the things I love about Dublin is buildings don't look like traditional buildings in other areas of the country. This doesn't look like a daycare to me. It looks like it could be an office. It could be a something else. And I really like that about it. I appreciate the explanation from the applicant and from staff on the consolidated space. And I think, that I have no concern on that item after hearing the explanation of the joint responsibility there. So I'm confident that'll be handled appropriately going forward. But other than that, no other concerns or questions, and I'm in favor of this proposal.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. Mr. Supelak.
I'm going to echo a few of my commissioners. I too am in favor of this proposal. I think it's an attractive building. Y'all have done a good job navigating this sort of unfortunate path that was required to make these sites work. There's a few extra hurdles and hiccups in there, and you guys are navigating it well. It's an attractive product. It'll be a nice addition to the city.
So Zach, back to you. Were you able to locate?
Yes, I was. So with the preliminary development plan, the waiver for 80% primary materials was approved. For the north elevation, they proposed 72% primary material. The south elevation was 65%. The east elevation was 70%, and the west elevation was 56%. This also includes metal paneling, as that is a secondary material. So it's not just the cementuous siding, it does include any other secondary material.
And as presented tonight, does it meet all of those criteria that have already been approved in the preliminary?
Yes, the proposed elevations are what was approved with preliminary development plan.
Thank you. Mr. Fishman, any other call outs, any other comments or concerns?
Oh, no problem. I also think it's a nice looking building. I was just a concern, but if it meets the standards, if it meets what it was approved, that's fine with me.
Thank you, Mr. Fishman. All right. Well, before I make final comments, Zach, has any public comment been received during the course of this conversation?
We've received no public comment.
Thank you, Nikki. All right. It's nice to spend evenings with friends, and to the Primrose team, I feel like we've established that friendship. So thank you very much for deliberating with us. And the product really has turned out to be a wonderful product. I echo Ms. Kennedy's comments about it doesn't look like. Well, to me, I'd like to turn the comment, and it looks like, do the positive. It looks like it could be an office building. It looks like it could be a salon. It looks like it could be anything. And when we're coming from the perspective of planning not just for the 5-10 years into the future, but really what we're carving out and putting our stamp of approval on is still the 50 to 100 year. And so that's why you'll hear us get hung up on things like signage or dumpster enclosures or primary versus secondary materials, because we're all working to make Dublin a beautiful place to live, work, and play. And Primrose School, we anticipate, will be part of that equation. So thank you very much for coming and spending your evening with us. And with that statement, I will turn it back over to Commission. It looks like I am looking for a couple of motions this evening. The first one is a motion to approve the final development plan 20-213 to construct a 2-story, approximately 16,000 square foot daycare and associated site improvements on a 1.3 acre parcel with 6 conditions. And just for clarification, Zach, could you present the 6 conditions for review before I entertain that motion?
Certainly.
And Commission, as soon as one of my fellow commissioners is ready, I am ready for that motion.
Ms. Call, should we also ask if the applicant is okay with these conditions as well?
We certainly can. Elena, do you want to speak for the group?
Sure. Nikki and Zach, we appreciate your time, the Primrose team. We had a conversation prior to this hearing, and these conditions are not a surprise to our team, and we feel that we can meet them.
Thank you for that, and thank you, Christina. Mr. Grimes, did I hear a first from you?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Grimes. And a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. Ms. Beal?
Mr. Fishman,
Yes.
Mr. Supalack,
Yes.
Ms. Call,
Yes.
Mr. Grimes,
Yes.
Ms. Kennedy,
Yes.
Mr. Snare.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Beal. And motion number 2, to recommend approval to City Council for final plat 20-212 to establish 2 lots and dedicate 1 public right-of-way on a 3.58 acre site. And Zach, could I have you present again the 3 conditions, and Elena will go through the same rigmarole this time after you've reviewed those 3 conditions.
Yes, we are aware of the conditions and will continue to work with the team.
Thank you very much. Commission?
So move.
Thank you, Mr. Grimes. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. Ms. Beal?
Mr. Snare,
Yes.
Mr. Supalack,
Yes.
Mr. Fishman,
Yes.
Ms. Kennedy,
Yes.
Ms. Call,
Yes.
Mr. Grimes.
Looks like we're having audio connection issues
Yeah.
with Mr. Grimes.
You hear me say yes?
I think he's back. Mr. Grimes, can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay, I've got it.
Thank you, Ms. Beal, and thank you, Mr. Grimes. You went away, you disappeared on us for a moment. Well, Primrose team, thank you again. We certainly look forward to welcoming you into the Dublin community, and you have a wonderful evening.
Thank
You as well. Thank you.
you too.
All right, ladies and gentlemen. We are moving on to case number 5 this evening, Bridge Street District Amended Final Development Plan, case 20-177, ADMC, Administrative Request Code Amendment. So we have 3, is that right? 4 of these this evening. This application is an introduction to amend zoning code section 153.066 to add an amended final development plan provision to the review process for the Bridge Street District in alignment with other review processes. So before we even get started, I want to say thank you, Nikki. I mean, this has been one of those afterthought items that will really, I think, help us into the future. So I will turn time over to you for our case presentation.
Great. Good evening, Chair and members of the Planning and Zoning Commission. I do not have a PowerPoint presentation this evening due to the unique nature of this code amendment. However, I will be providing a general overview. This is a request for amendments to the Chapter 153.066, which is the process portion of the Bridge Street District Code. The Bridge Street District is a form-based area of the city located within I-270 and contains a number of zoning districts. In 2019, the review process procedures were amended, and this amendment was largely in name only. The names of the case types were changed to align with the planned unit development case types, which are concept plan, preliminary development plan, and final development plan. As you may be aware, in the planned unit development review process, should there be changes subsequent to the approval of a final development plan, there is the opportunity for the applicant to seek consideration of an amended final development plan. This is key, and as Ms. Call indicated, was a oversight on behalf of staff when the 2019 code amendment was brought forward. Under the current Bridge Street District process regulations, a amendment or modification to an existing developed site would either, if it was extraordinarily minor in nature, be a minor project review, but in most cases would be a 3-step development review process, which can be quite onerous should an applicant be making site modifications or building modifications that exceed the threshold for a minor project review. So the proposed changes before you include the addition of the AFDP process, as well as modifications to cross-references that have been influenced by the changes, and also provides a new cross-reference for parking plans, which is an error as well from the 2019 amendment. With that, I would be happy to answer any questions that the commission may have.
All right, looking to you, Commission. I don't have any questions. I am very, very grateful for this new step in the process. Any questions or comments from the Commission? Mr. Fishman, you're muted.
Questions about all of them?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that, Mr. Fishman.
This question about all the amendments, we're not, right? Or just the one?
Just the one. All right. I will entertain a motion to amend the zoning code section 153.066 to add an amended final development plan provision to the review process for the Bridge Street District in alignment with other review processes.
And so Ms. Call, this is actually an introduction this evening. This will be on your March 4th agenda for a motion. So my apologies for the confusion.
No worries. That makes it even easier. Any public comment on it?
There is no public comment on this application.
Okay. All right. And it looks like same for the next one. We are not looking for motions on any of these.
Correct. These are all introductions this evening.
Fantastic. Moving on then to item 6, Specialty Hospitals 21-009 ADMC, Administrative Request Code Amendment. This application is an introduction to amend the zoning code to add provisions for specialty hospitals. So, Ms. Noble, welcome, welcome. It's good to see you again.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to let the commission know that I did prepare a presentation for the next 3 code modifications that we're reviewing. So I don't want to confuse anyone. I do want to reiterate what Nikki had stated. These are introductions, so we look forward to working with the commission as we move forward. Once we get comments from the commission, we want to make sure that this is holistically what the commission is looking for before we move forward to City Council. And so we look forward to reviewing these code amendments. So if you give me a moment, I will share my presentation.
Ms. Noble, would it be helpful if I read all 3 into the record?
That would be, yes, thank you.
Okay. As you're bringing up the presentation then, I will say that we are not only hearing item 6 tonight, but item 7, garage conversions 21-010 ADMC Administrative Request Code Amendment. This application is an introduction to amend the zoning code to address the conversion of garages into habitable spaces in residential zoning districts. And finally, 8, Technology Flex District Vehicle Repair Major 21-011 ADMC Administrative Request Code Amendment. This application is an introduction to amend zoning code section 153-.044 to modify permitted uses related to motor vehicle repair major in the Technology Flex District. And with that, Ms. Noble, I will turn the time over to you.
Thank you so much. So again, we are reviewing 3 introductions to code modifications that staff has been working on for quite some time. These code modifications are from various entities, including internal sources, including our economic development team, and boards and commissions, including the Planning and Zoning Commission and City Council. Staff is addressing some concerns that have been provided for certain current code modifications. And again, we look forward to working through this discussion with the Planning and Zoning Commission. So of the 3 code modifications, the first and probably the most prominent that the Planning and Zoning Commission has been introduced to is specialty hospitals, which currently is not a land use classification that we have in the city of Dublin. We classify these under hospitals, And so the question becomes, do we define them separately? If so, how do we define them? What's the process that we would follow for reviewing them, and where should they be permitted? The second code modification is related to residential districts that are wishing to convert residential garages into habitable space, which is mostly an administrative process, so it probably doesn't reach the level of the Planning and Zoning Commission, but has been a source of discussion both internally amongst our staff, but with City Council members based on some comments from the public and disagreement for, or I should say concerns for this process. Specifically for when this conversion process takes place, that we're eliminating storage space and parking requirements for residential requirements. The third is dealing with the what I refer to as the Tech Flex District. It's actually Technology Flex District. I apologize for the spelling error. But specifically in this district, we do allow for major car repair, which has been a source of issues with surrounding properties as well as our economic development team. And so we've been asked to analyze this district and see if we should omit such services. So with that, I will, just as a point of logistics, I will introduce the specialty hospitals discussion. I will go through our analysis, and then I'll end my presentation with our discussion points so we can actually talk amongst ourselves, and then I will re-engage the PowerPoint presentation. Excuse me. Specialty hospitals have been a source of conversation with Planning and Zoning Commission, most prominently at your last meeting in October of 2020. Again, specifically, we allow this type of use to be universally categorized in hospitals, which is permitted in predominantly in our suburban office district, 7 districts within the Bridge Street districts, and a classification that we don't use commonly, but it's called the exceptional use district, which is a specialty district that we use for basically a catch-all district for primarily uses that we don't classify otherwise. During our discussion on October 1st, the Planning and Zoning Commission was very thorough. You were unanimous in your request to ask staff to identify various specialty hospitals based on their operations. And identify those operations, and then we could analyze where those uses should be placed within the zoning code. Shortly thereafter, we met with the law director's office, and as an alternative proposal, they suggested that we look not so much in terms of care that's being provided by these operations, but more so what their operational needs or their site design standards would be that we need to be mindful of in terms of conditions or analysis. So we've worked with the law director's office to provide the following information for the Planning Commission. But before I get into the definition, I wanted to provide a general overview of where in the city we could provide these uses. So the primary use, or the primary category that we allow these uses is suburban office district, which is a general zoning classification that we allow medical uses. These are sporadically located throughout the city, but you will see inside of 270 in the metro, basically in the metro Blazer area, and along the north and southern areas of Shire Rings, there are sites that would classify under suburban office. Most of these sites are developed, so this proposal would come into play if they were redeveloped. There are a few sites that are vacant, but again, that's not the predominant characteristic for suburban office. The other zoning classification that's predominant for hospitals are 7 zoning districts within the Bridge Street district. And again, this is a kind of a concentrated area within 270. Those districts are predominantly the office and residential component to the Bridge Street district, the office district, and various neighborhood districts within the Bridge Street district, as well as the public zoning classification. So in this area, there are a multitude of parcels that would classify for hospitals. So in terms of defining specialty hospitals, we've done a great deal of research. Of course, we usually start out with national organizations, American Planning Association. I've researched various medical associations to identify definitions that they think would be applicable. We've researched other communities within the region to see if they identify specialty hospitals. So I would politely say this is a conglomerate of information that I've gathered, and this is literally a definition that I'm proposing to the commission with all hopes that we can work through some of the components. The definition does have 4 points, excuse me, that I've dissected so we could talk about independently. Excuse me. The first is identify specialty hospitals related to medical care for patients that includes care intended for the time of admissions to extend 7 consecutive days or more. So we're talking about long-term stay. The second is that there's an admission process to these facilities opposed to being open to the general public, and that they're licensed accordingly as a specialty hospital. The third provision of the definition is clearly just a general overview of some of the types of uses that could be facilitated within a specialty hospital. And lastly is a sentence that identifies some of the characteristics that we've identified for other specialty hospitals, and that being that there be some sort of additional amenities, including outdoor areas for recreational uses, that there may be 24-hour care providers or additional security issues, including fencing or additional staffing. As this first draft is being proposed, we are proposing that specialty hospitals be identified as a conditional use, primarily within the suburban office district, potentially the districts within the Bridge Street district. We're not including the exceptional use districts, simply based on the fact that we don't have districts that are currently under the zoning classification. Again, it's fairly rarely used. With this provision as a conditional use, we're looking to identify parameters for these uses, including the fact that recreation areas be provided to the rear of the buildings, and any type of lighting and fencing which are commonplace for facilities be required to meet code. And with that, I'm asking for the Planning and Zoning Commission to help me with a few items. Specifically identifying specialty hospitals. Again, this was quite a challenge, so I'm looking for some feedback from the commission. Which districts should permit specialty hospitals, including, again, suburban office, the Bridge Street districts and/or exceptional use districts. What process should be required? In this particular instance, I'm defaulting to a conditional use process, but we could discuss whether it be a permitted use with specific requirements for approval, and of course any other comments from the Planning and Zoning Commission.
Thank you. And I see this being kind of an informal discussion this evening. So with that, Commission, having had opportunity to review the prepared material and to hear the presentation this evening, let's just jump right in. So Christina, do you want to start us off?
Thanks, Rebecca. Thank you so much, Tammy, for the presentation. I am not going to pretend to be a specialty hospital expert. You have done a lot of research. There were just a couple sticking points for me that I wanted to ask about and maybe get some discussion going. And the first was the call out on 7 consecutive days or more. I have not ever stayed at a specialty hospital place. Is that is 7? Is that kind of some kind of demarcation, short term versus long term? I'd love to get some thoughts on that.
No, that's an excellent question. Honestly, we are trying to distinguish between a general hospital and a specialty hospital. And honestly, that requirement came from the simple fact that most general hospitals, for whatever care that you're being seen for, essentially usually is between 3 and 5 days, unless it's a chronic condition. So we landed on 7 days. Again, there's no magical number that we're looking for. We're simply trying to identify care facilities that have a specialty and a long-term basis for that specialty.
This is not my area of expertise at all. I'm an engineer, so I don't know if there are others in the commission that have any kind of perspective or comments on that. But I just wanted to get I wanted to understand your logic with that day requirement, Tammy. And then my other only question on this was towards the end about section 9, item A. All outdoor recreational areas shall be located to the rear of the primary structure. And I know Jane's not with us today, but I can kind of feel like her voice channeling through my head. She talks a lot about, engaging the streetscape and engaging the community in walkable areas. So I'm curious if any of my fellow commissioners have an opinion on that. Just from a green space and a usability perspective, it seems like the way that this is written is that this would be a space for the residents that wouldn't be really usable for the general public. Is that correct?
That is correct. It will be intended for private space, and quite frankly, would not, in many facilities, would not allow interaction with the public.
Okay. I appreciate that confirmation on that. Those are my only 2 call outs. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else on the commission items for discussion? Mr. Supelak, you want to go next?
Lots of hands going up. It's a race now. By the way, the 7 days also, I'm hung up there as well. There's almost, I wrote at some point, and Tammy, this is great and kudos. We definitely need this in some way, shape, or form. But I wrote at some point, how do we eliminate regular hospitals from this, right? Because regular hospitals do have people staying more than 7 days, and I don't see anything. Unfortunately, the way it's written right now, I don't see anything that would preclude regular hospitals now from coming into a suburban office area and claiming their specialty. So one, there's that sort of problem, I think, in the language, and maybe there's another catch, another hook that sort of precludes them. The other thing is, are we really? I guess I'm going to a lot of these specialty hospitals. Is it really any facility? 7 seems like a lot. That seems like a high threshold for the specialty hospital, i.e., any place that has overnight care. Of the sort of specialty hospital examples, I think we entertained previously, would qualify mentally for me as a specialty hospital, and I think we were kind of defining their use a little bit, or the examples where I feel like they were a rehab center that might have overnight care, and take that as a physical rehab center or a or a chemical addiction rehab center, right? Some of those, which could have stays shorter than 7 days, and suddenly now they're below that threshold. So that threshold is I think causing me heartburn as well. And I don't know. I understand how you were trying to back into that relative to the commentary from the lawyers, but I'm not sure it's quite there yet.
So if I could interject and just kind of try to set the stage, and if my memory serves me correctly, this definition and the request for the specialty hospital group came because our current hospital definition didn't quite meet the needs of a kind of these odd uses that we were getting. So when we're looking at a hospital and we're looking at the amount of parking that any particular hospital needs, the argument from the applicants was, well, we don't need that much because our guests are overnight. Our guests stay here longer. We don't need, the outdoor space because we are a rehab treatment facility where our patrons can't walk because we're an orthopedic, type group. So if we could kind of take a step back and really look into you, Tammy and Nikki, to kind of help jog our memory on those items that were talked about that are different requirements for this different definition. Specialty hospitals also, that term is used for women's hospitals, for cancer hospitals, for those types of things. But if we could kind of extract the definition and say, okay, well, what we're trying to do is come up with a different classification for the types of use that have lower parking requirements, additional open space requirement that is secluded from the public open space because of the nature of the use. So if we could go through kind of a list of items that differentiate this type of use versus our current hospital, I think that will kind of set the stage and help us to form more consistency in our opinions to help tailor the code in the future.
Rebecca, I completely appreciate that comment because that is the struggle that we're dealing with is I'm almost turning that conversation on its head and going towards what do general hospitals not want to deal with in terms of what specialty hospitals do want to deal with or have to deal with. So just off the cuff, one of the things, obviously there's smaller locations. I do really want to talk to the commission about the stay requirement because, again, that could be very flexible, right? That could be outpatient care, that could be inpatient care. But when you read the definition, we're looking at those 4 bullet points cohesively. So it's not just, do you stay a number of days? It's, do you meet these other requirements? So, so that might help. But yeah, there are other requirements with these facilities, and a lot of times they're based on the fact that people are staying for a lengthy period of time. So they need a outdoor recreational space. They need individual rooms where they, may have a level of care that's not provided in a general hospital. These hospitals, again, are licensed differently, and they simply navigate differently than a hospital that have the public coming and going on a more consistent basis. So I hope that I've started to identify some of the difference between a hospital and a specialty hospital, but I look forward to hearing your comments.
Yeah, I wonder if we could come at this a little differently because I'm sort of bothered by the syntax. We're trying to define specialty hospital, and we say a specialty hospital provides specialized medical care, which just repeats the title. But then it says that it is licensed as a hospital specializing in a specific type of treatment. So, because we're not, I don't think any of us, well, Jane has a medical background, but can we look to, if there's a licensing agency on a state level or national level that has sort of made this determination of what is a specialty hospital, to what extent can we sort of use that? Because I was a little surprised to see that, you know, that says is licensed as a hospital specializing in a certain kind of care. So is it an oversimplification to at least start there? And we, you know, elsewhere in the code, we adopt, you know, national standards, fire, et cetera. Might we be able to incorporate some definitions that are used? And I know you indicated you did research. So that's my question about this term of art, specialty hospital. And if it is indeed a term of art, do we have to go through the process of defining it ourselves?
I guess my response to that would be I have had a very difficult time in defining it, not only based on other communities, but honestly, there's a classification and an industrial zoning classification that defines our land uses. And if you ever look at our zoning code, there's a numeric prefix to all of our land use classifications, and that goes to a more specific definition that defines whatever use you're looking for. So what I did was I went back through those classifications and I tried to identify characteristics that I thought were indicative of more specialized care. But by no means do I think that I'm not claiming to be a master creator of definitions.
But well, I made a comment, but it was a question, was not intended to be rhetorical. One of the phrases says is licensed as a hospital specializing in specific type of treatment. So is there some state or national licensing process that says, oh, you are a specialized hospital and you specialize in, you know, occupational rehabilitation or whatever? Because you use that phrase, and I'm wondering the import of that phrase.
No, there definitely is a licensing requirement for specialty hospitals. There definitely is.
Right. One of the.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I think I know what you're trying to bring to the fore is that it is, you know, is there a Ohio hospital administration that is giving these a particular designation as quote unquote specialty hospitals? And in our review of hospital licensure in the ORC, at least, many of these specialties are governed by different boards and under different titles of the code. And so that's why it has that sort of general phrasing in this definition. Because, for example, a hospital that is specializing in psychiatric care is licensed by a certain section of the revised code, whereas, you know, occupational rehabilitative care would be something different. And in our review of those things, there's not a central governing body that controls that.
I guess that what I hoped would be a solution actually bothers me a little more then, because in you know, with this, it's inclusion, not exclusion. So one of the points is licensed as a hospital. So the applicant would be required to come forth and say, we're a specialty hospital in this is our specialty, and we're licensed by this organization, this governmental or whatever whatever association, medical association. Do we, you know, and if there isn't a comprehensive, I guess it doesn't have to be comprehensive, but if it's a hodgepodge of that, then comes the question, do we want to make that a requirement? I was hoping that could be like the be all end all, but now you turn it upside down and say, wow, like there could be all sorts of different standards. And before we get to sort of the planning and zoning, we become the arbiters of, are they indeed are they a specialty hospital or not? And, we're all having a problem here as lay people with that. I just push back, and my comment is I'd like to see, and I'm willing to do some work on syntax and conditions, but this just seems very difficult to get our arms around, and would be very difficult to administer in a fair and equitable way to give due process to applicants. And I'll defer on that. Give up the bench here.
So where I started, again, thinking at how this came to be, is I jotted down different types of uses. So I had memory treatment, elder care, occupational or long-term rehabilitation, substance abuse, mental health treatment, and the types of uses that then spill over into how they affect or are affected by parking, open space, access, pick up and drop off, smaller footprints adjacent to neighborhood zonings, and setback requirements. So I kind of went at this in a little bit different way of, okay, hospital, we have a zone. What types of facilities don't really have all of the requirements that a hospital would need? When we're looking at hospital, we're looking at bigger footprints. We're looking in, kind of our gateway areas. We're looking, we don't have necessarily the concerns about putting a hospital next to an elementary school, whereas with a substance abuse treatment facility, we might. And so looking at it from that perspective, if we look at defining the type of use where it is a treatment facility, and we lose it if we define it as loosely as a treatment facility that has a less requirement for parking because people aren't coming in and out as much with their cars. They're either being dropped off, they're being dropped off by ambulance, or they stay for longer periods of time without a vehicle on the premises. Neighborhood, what that neighborhood setting is. So again, going back to Ms. Noble's map on all of the different areas in the Bridge Street District that this would be available in, do we want to restrict those types of areas? So is there anything as far as the types of uses that we've talked about in the past that I didn't cover in that quick list that I rattled off, or that are already covered in a different section of the code? So for instance, we have the treatment facility that's, what is it, Brookside here on Muirfield, and then the one that's just on Dublin Granville Road that's kind of that elder care nursing home type. Does that fall into a different zoning and therefore needs to be removed from my list? And then if we call it specialty hospital, I've had my knee and my ankle rebuilt at an orthopedic specialty hospital, and that's all over the sign. Do we want to land on that definition? And I agree, circular definitions are problematic, but I think working together, we can all come up with something that is acceptable and accomplishes really what we're looking to do, which is differentiate the types of treatment facilities and how that impacts planning and zoning and the accompanying rules and regulations that come along with that.
Rebecca, that's a great overview of some of the things that I think that you've probably seen with the Planning and Zoning Commission. The one thing that I might add to that is, again, and I'm referencing facilities that might be more indicative of maybe perhaps involuntary enrollment processes. So again, there could be some security measures that are required. That means there's outdoor areas that need to be secured, and specifically secured in a manner that we're not typically accustomed to. So that's the only thing that I would add to what you were speaking of.
All right, so Commission, I know that this is an informal discussion and that staff will, work on some of this, but they are really relying on our feedback tonight to bring back something that would be acceptable or at least a discussion point for the next time. So are there other call outs that you as a commission have, Mr. Grimes?
Yes, thank you. I think this is an excellent revision in addition to the code to probably, if nothing else, support this type of a business to be located in our corridor around our hospitals and increase the professional services in our region. And I think that typically these facilities are licensed out of the Ohio Department of Health or their enabling groups. So, licensure can probably be tracked back to either the State Department or subsidiary thereof. But there's also a lot of different types of these facilities that have credentialing through associations, whether they're state hospital groups or nursing home groups or assisted living groups. They all have certification. So there's another area that you may look at besides licensure is certification. And I would say that the hospitals do have specialty units within their hospitals, specialty hospitals, whether it's for neonatal units or cancer or other things. They wouldn't necessarily come under this type of thing. This is focused on a freestanding type of facility, and that's what we're talking about. It could be, for if they have a need for a bed for premature births after a couple of months, they can't go home, but they can't stay where they were born. So this might be a category that would be an excellent addition to the area. But I think you're also looking at groups of professionals. You're going to look at a group of psychiatrists, a group of orthopods, or a group, whatever it is. There may be some other professional numbers that you might want to look at across the spectrum. But I would say that this is a good thing to pay attention to in support of the wider availability of healthcare in our area and to attract the professionals that are needed to staff it. So I guess that's about all I would say.
Thank you, Mr. Grimes. Mr. Fishman?
I think it's all been covered. When I look, first of all, I think you've done an incredible job on this. I mean, reams of paper that you've went through this morning.
Mr. Fishman, you muted yourself. You cut out after reams of paper.
Oh, okay. How about that? Okay. And I really appreciate the work. I kind of looked at it from the other side, and I said to myself, what kind of specialty units you wouldn't want in a certain place? Like, for example, if you have something like, let's say, a memory unit, you probably wouldn't want it in Bridge Street, because Bridge Street, we want to generate people coming and going and patronizing the restaurants and all those kind of things. So maybe same thing with the drug addiction type thing, where these people have long-term stays and never leave the building. So I think it's real difficult. I think Mr. Grimes said it really well. I think several of the people, it's tough to come up with something, but I think we maybe have to come up with something that puts them in certain categories, and whether it's agencies or licensing or something that would do that. Because as I said, when I first looked at it, I said, well, I don't think I'd want a memory unit in Bridge Street. That would take a lot of space and generate no traffic. So that's my only comments.
Thank you, Mr. Fishman. Mr. Supla.
Was someone else going to jump in there?
I was just going to.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
No.
I just wanted to respond to the Mr. Fishman's comment. First of all, just to note that in defining this and in suggesting either the SO district or Bridge Street, certain parts of the Bridge Street district, it's not to say that there's any marriage to having this type of use in the Bridge Street district. And I think that points have been brought up as to why, in terms of the community character that some of these neighborhoods in the Bridge Street district are looking for, that a specialty hospital of any type may not be desirable. But just to provide some more background on why, we were reluctant to say specialty hospitals for medical or for memory care get, X treatment, and specialty hospitals for psychiatric get Y, and specialty hospitals for substance abuse get Z, is, we felt that those lines would be hard to draw, and that all of those things are in one way or another a form of disability. And if we start treating one different than the other, would we have the data to back that up? And so that's why we're trying to wrap the specialty hospital in one package. Maybe we can be successful with that, maybe we can't, but that's the sort of thinking that has informed this initial draft. Is if we start drawing lines among different types of care being provided, are we going to be able to have the data to back that up when we start having different use specific standards for them?
Thank you, Thad, for that clarification. Any other questions, call outs? Yes, Mark.
Yeah, the struggle is real, right, on this one. Tammy, amazing work. I feel like when we talked about this previously, we talked about the danger is, does this proliferate into a wealth of different types down the, once we start going down this rabbit hole. And I guess I'd even go into, so there's an effort to generalize, that's applaudable, and end up there. I think, unfortunately, I think we have to probably do the exercise around discern how we generalize it. We might have to do the exercise, and this is just my suggestion. Do we make the list of all these hospitals and mentally start dancing with what parking requirements are different for it? Just unfortunately, it's just like Thad talked about. Intuitively, why would facility X, Y, or Z need more or less parking? Why would they need more or different relationships to the neighborhood? Why would they need, go through the sort of standard criteria, the zoning criteria, and just throw it down on a piece of paper with the entire list made, and step back and discern, are there clusters and pockets? And to Thad's point, then discern, do we need different standards or not? How do we generalize away from that? And or what if we do have different standards, can we support appropriately relative to other things we're doing? Unfortunately, I think you got to go down to that level and then abstract out, not try and abstract at the general level and try and apply down, would be my suggestion, unfortunately.
Yeah, and luckily we have the boilerplate for that already with our planning report that says condition met, condition met, condition met, condition met with conditions, criteria met, sorry, with conditions. And so if we can go back to the impetus for this code amendment and essentially do kind of that test criteria alongside, and perhaps even engage with some of those applicants in the previous instances and say, okay, well, why do you need less parking? Why do you require open, an increase in open space? I recall one thing that we didn't see, but I made a comment on it because in our planning report, there was previous meeting minutes. So Nikki, it was the parcel that's over off of Post that had the meeting minutes that were included were from a former city council meeting that had some criteria about access, and it was security based. And so I caught onto that at our planning and zoning commission, but it turns out that the city council notes were from a different application. They didn't apply to the item that we were looking at. But I remember grabbing onto that because it was so different in the use case that we were looking at. So Ms. Noble, do you have at least enough information from the commission tonight to kind of go back and do that type of analysis? And do you feel comfortable with that level?
And of course, I just to reiterate, I want to make sure that I'm understanding completely. It sounds like I'm going to go in a more definitive role in terms of specific specialty hospitals, identifying how those facilities operate, and perhaps even talking to them, which Ms. Call, I will tell you, I've thought about that. I have some contacts with some facilities that I've worked with in the past. So that's completely doable. And then identifying needs of those care or those facilities, and then coming back and maybe reassessing how we incorporate that into a definition. Is that correct?
That's correct. The only caveat that I would add there is I am a little uncomfortable with hospital, because some of these places don't call themselves hospitals, they're treatment facilities or something like that. So the licensed as a specialty hospital in the definition was one that I underlined, because
Okay.
you know, some of the items that we're looking at aren't necessarily hospitals, they're more rehabilitation centers or treatment facilities and that sort of thing. And I think that that's really what we were looking for in the, it looks like a duck, it doesn't quack like a duck, so what is it?
And I might still say, I mean, we have medical offices covered in the code robustly. The trigger here that makes this different is still some version of an overnight stay, I think. Right? Overnight treatment, overnight care.
Yes.
That clear as mud.
I'm with you. I appreciate the comments. Again, I feel like this is a working document, and we will get to the finish line eventually.
Well, we certainly appreciate your diligence and all of the time. We know that this is somewhat thankless work, and well, we want to make sure that we are saying thank you repeatedly, yes, because it is well deserved.
Not easy.
Anything else
thank you.
on hospitals?
Yes, thank you very
before
much.
we move on to take your pick, technology flex or accessory uses? All right. Ms. Noble, since we battered and bruised you enough this evening, do you want to take your pick on either of these next items?
No, this is nothing. Thank you. I will. And let me go ahead and share my presentation again, and we'll move on to the next subject.
Thank you.
So if you'd be kind enough to transition to our second conversation, this code modification was directed towards planning by means of City Council, based on some public input that we've gotten for a permitted process for applicants to residential applicants to convert their attached garages into habitable spaces. Again, which is permitted by code, but has alluded to some unintended consequences that council wanted us to address. So we've been working again with our law director's office for this modification. We're specifically identifying the conversion of garages. This is exclusively for our standard residential zoning classifications, which go from the rural district to the R12 district. This would put parameters on the conversion of garage spaces to habitable spaces, with the caveat that that's an acceptable conversion, with the fact that they would have either an existing garage that's comparable in size, or that they have the space to build a comparable sized garage on the property. With that, there's not a lot of discussion. Again, this is applicable to all residential districts and intended to address what we would say as storage needs and parking needs that we're finding as a complaint that we're finding from the residential community. And I would welcome any comments from the commission.
Okay, I'm just wondering if I could take liberties and kick us off. This one I struggled with a little bit because I had my former, city council hat on and property rights echoing and everything else. So I imagine that this was brought up by neighbors who are saying, hey, look, this has an impact on my right of peaceful enjoyment, right? And so as I look at the city of Dublin, we have parking standards that everyone has to meet. And so I think the number one criteria that I would go to is you can't convert anything that then puts you into non-conformance with the parking agreement or the parking requirements. So that would be my standard number one. If the parking requirements were that you had to have 2 off-street covered parking spaces and you only have a 2-car garage or 2 1-car garages, then you cannot convert one because you no longer meet the parking requirements. But for a house, and this specifically, if I read it correctly, addresses attached garages, not detached garages. So for a house where I buy a house and for some reason, it has, well, not for some reason, when I buy the house, it has 2-car attached garages. And I'm going to live there for forever. The code requires that I have 2 off-street covered parking spaces. I have 4. If I want to convert one of the 2-car garages into habitable space, my property taxes are going to go up because now my habitable space is higher. My property value is going to go up, but I'm not impacting anyone else because I still meet the parking requirements by keeping my 2-car garage. My next door neighbor only has a 2-car garage. They want to do the same thing because they don't use their garage. They can't do it because they only have the 2-car garage. The way that the code is written right now, the commensurate size interpretation of that, I actually thought at one point in time I read that the larger of the 2 garages had to be kept. So if I have 2 2-car garages, one is 240 square feet, one is 250 square feet, but the location of the 250 is adjacent to where I want to put a studio, I can't do it because it's the larger of the 2 and the code requires that I keep the larger of the 2. I just don't want to be so prescriptive that if somebody buys a house with a Taj Mahal garage that is however many 2-car garages next to each other that are all attached that fall into this code, they can't do with their property what they want because the house was built that way initially and can't be changed because tough luck.
No, those are good points. And honestly, I've struggled a bit with what would we require, right? I mean, would we require that you even have, because quite frankly, our current regulations require parking for residential districts. We don't necessarily require that they're uncovered or so forth and so on. Some of the complaints that we're getting are based, I'm just gonna throw out a few things. My neighbor's not putting their garage can in an acceptable location, or again, they have 4 cars in their driveway, whereas if they had a garage, they could put them in the garage. So I agree, it's tough to decide where we draw this line. I do feel a little more comfortable with the fact that differentiating between attached and detached, because quite frankly, detached tends to not be such an issue with the city of Dublin. Many of our garages are attached. So that I could say I'm safely comfortable with, but again, I'll let the commission discuss amongst yourselves.
So I'm actually kind of surprised we don't have a covered versus non-covered parking requirement, especially in the climate that we're in. So that may be the entrance point for discussion, understanding that grandfathering in is real and that sort of thing, but that may be It would be helpful to look at this from the perspective of the previous issues, because if it's cans not behind, well, you know, that can be nuisance code can address that. If it's home-based businesses, then we can have code that addresses that. If it, you know, all of those different types of things, I have on my for discussion later on, but I'll mention it here. I know that it's frustrating when the snowplows are running to have cars parked on the street. In my former city, it was a city ordinance. You couldn't park on the street when the snowplows were running, period. And so when you have those different issues that you're trying to address, having those in your mind help form how you're going to tailor the code that surrounds that. So you mentioned one that was, you know, the cans aren't put in the right area. And I think that that can be solved outside of garage code specifically. But are there other items that were brought up that maybe City Council was thinking of when they kicked this to us to kind of bat around?
Well, I didn't mean to oversimplify. Those were just a couple of instances. The other, quite frankly, the other issue that I've been aware of is just the general aesthetics of when conversions of garage, because garages are usually predominant features of a home, and when they're converted, it looks awkward when there's modifications to those spaces. So that's another issue that we've been asked to address.
That is helpful. Thank you. All right, Commission, having reviewed the proposed draft language, Mr. Fishman? You're muted.
Yeah, no, I'm not. Let me do this here. Okay. Anyway, I think it's another challenging subject. First of all, as you drive around, can you hear me? Okay. Okay. As you drive around and you see there's in Columbus and surrounding areas, not as much in Dublin, but you see a lot of garage conversions, and they're either really bad or really good. Okay. A lot of people's conversion is they take the garage door out and they put some paneling in a brick house and maybe a little window, and now it's a room. So I wonder if we would have architectural review on those. Tammy, is that could we do something like that? Because I mean, you can make a house really ugly by eliminating the garage. Am I unmuted?
No, you're we can hear you. I was just thinking for a minute. Yeah, I mean, right now, this is an administrative process for review, but I'm trying to think of whether we could do some sort of use-specific standards of when you convert these types, well, this type of area into habitable space, whether we could say you have to, you know, make it cohesive to the exterior of the main structure. You have to have an opening. We might be able to work with that to get to the quality aspect. So let me think on that.
Okay. The other points are that Rebecca, I think the reason that the issue between covered and not covered is if it's covered or not covered, you still see the cars. And I think the objection to neighbors is not if it's covered or not covered, but they see all these cars sitting around. And also carports, there's some areas of Columbus where there's a lot of carports, and people still have their lawnmowers and their junk and so on in the carport. Okay. And so that's usually a big objection, you know.
I actually wasn't referring to covered as a carport. I was referring to covered as enclosed. So garage versus driveway.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So, so that's an issue. The other thing is, I think this is a really important issue, because I think the way the world's going, we might be getting, people might go down to one car families and then maybe no car families with the type of self-driving automobiles and so on, at least in your most of your lifetime. So I think that it should be covered, but I think that it's really a good point that you made, that that we replace if we enclose a garage for living space, we replace it with parking as if, especially now, and that's a huge problem. I have a neighbor who's a wonderful guy, and he owns 4 cars, and he has a 2-car garage, and he's always pulling in and out, parking in front of my house. He's a nice guy, and I, no problem. But for me, it's a problem for some of my other neighbors. So I think replacing the parking is really important. Other than that, again, I applaud you for attacking these issues, but I think architecture is going to be important, and I think that replacing the space is important. Thank you.
Mr. Grimes.
I would have to think that this probably more applies to some of the older areas rather than some of the newer areas, that subdivisions where plats have definite setbacks, side yards, all that kind of thing. Because for the newer places, if you have room to put it on an addition, there's nothing to stop you from putting in the addition, but the restrictions of the subdivision or plat would say you have to have X, Y, and Z, and you're not going to change the house substantially enough to be either afoul of setbacks or the subdivision regulations. So now, if we're talking about the older areas, they are going to have to apply. If it's in a zoning district or an area, is there something that's in the code applying to that needs shoring up, or is this the most appropriate way of dealing with that? That's kind of an open question. I don't know the answer to that, but I would think that there may be parking plan language that needs to be applied, perhaps in some other areas, cross references to something like this, so that when somebody comes in and says wants a permit to add on to their house, you have some addressable language to help those people in areas that may not be part of a well-refined subdivision plat regulations. Am I hitting any of the marks here, Tammy? Is this where some of the problems are?
I mean, yes, that is a challenge. I mean, honestly, I would almost say older areas as well as new areas. I mean, what we find is we create a building space for many of these residential plats, and people build big houses and they don't have a lot of space to do anything else once they build that space. So it's a challenge, honestly. And I'm, depending on what part of the city you're in, I'm sure it's more challenging than others, but I understand what your comments are, so I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Other questions, comments on garage conversions?
I'm just generally going to piggyback that my primary concern in this would probably be the quality. So whatever can be done to make it less purely administrative and somehow put some protective measures in place about the quality of the infill, I think is probably going to prove important. I agree with Ms. Call on a lot of the other things, trash cans being in the wrong place. It is dealt with elsewhere. I don't know that we'll ever sort of solve for don't cover your driveway in cars, right? That seems kind of problematic in a lot of regards. So the quality is probably a really heavy sticking point and affects property value in adjacent properties.
Thank you, Mark. Mr. Schneer.
Yeah, my first reaction was it's a solution in search of a problem, but I understand examples that were given, and I was surprised to the point that the parking requirements are not X number uncovered and X number covered. So if the parking requirements are, let's say, 2, whether they're covered or not covered, then whether the conversion doesn't impact that. But to Warren's point, people can have more than 2 cars with a 2-car garage. So now something's put on the street, and I wonder if the solution is, I know in Muirfield, and I'm guessing, I don't know if it's citywide or not, if there's a a prohibition on keeping cars on this, permanently parking cars on the street. So, rather than be prescriptive and overregulate, is the solution merely is not to, but just enforcement. You have a two-car garage. You want to convert the two-car garage to living space. Still have the driveway in front of the two-car garage or whatever that remains there, so you can park your two cars there, which means you're going to be out in the open. If you have three cars, the third car has to go somewhere. It can't go, if this is a question, but presumably it can't go in the street on a permanent basis, because I assume it can't. So now you have an issue with your third car, which may deter you from this conversion. If you don't have three cars, then the worst case is the two cars that were once in the driveway are now in the park, or now in the, that were once in your garage are now in the driveway that leads to nowhere because the garage has been converted. Do the neighbors like that? Do the neighbors not like that? I guess it doesn't rise to the level to me to create a whole relation about aesthetic quality, etc. So that's my opinion on it.
Now, Ms. Noble, correct me if I'm wrong. I believe I looked this up at one point in time, and there's nothing in the code that prohibits someone from parking their car on the street so long as it moves. It has to move like every 30 days or something. It's a long stretch. And so if you have three cars, you can always park on the street so long as you drive your car at least once every 30 days. And that number's sticking in my mind, but it might be the wrong count of days.
Yeah, we do have requirements they have to be operable and meet requirements for an acceptable automobile. And unless the roadway would restrict on-street parking, that would be permitted, yes.
And I think that's where we get some of the neighbor complaints. My neighbor converted their garage and now they park two cars on the street all the time, but there's nothing I can do about it because those cars move and they're operable and so right. I think that's probably the gist of some of the complaints.
It is definitely a collective host of complaints, yes.
Ms. Noble, do you this evening to draft something or to bring back a proposal kind of with those considerations in mind?
I think that I do, yes.
Okay, so I heard, quality a couple of times. If there's architectural review board or if there's pieces to the process, if there are restrictions or requirements as far as the amount of parking, whether that's off. No, I don't think we're, looking at the comments this evening, I don't think that we are against even of parking spaces in any future iterations so that we do get off-street parking in the residential neighborhoods.
No, I appreciate the recap, but thank you.
All right. I think we left our easiest for last. Do you want to take us on a road with the technology flex?
I do. And Mark, your cat is super cute. I can't help but to comment.
Thank you. Joins me at the right time.
Okay, well, thank you very much. So for the third code modification, this code modification is actually has been prompted by our economic development team regarding a use that's currently permitted. I should say you can all hear me and see the screen, right? Okay, thank you. A use that's currently permitted in our technology flex district, which I'm not sure this commission hears or even acknowledges that much. So I gave some background information in the memo about what the Tech Flex District is meant to do. But approximately, I would say less than 10 years ago, we created this district to replace all of our previous industrial zoning classifications to do two things. One, to minimize the intensity of industrial uses that are permitted within this district, and two, to allow for architectural standards that we were lacking in our previous industrial zoning classifications. So the intent of this district is to, one, promote industrial classifications that are light in nature, and two, allow for uses that are flexible in terms of technology-based companies that may want to expand or modify their needs as they grow and mature within the city of Dublin. Based on the pure nature of these zoning classifications, they're typically located along major thoroughfare locations, which means they're visible. And so this begs the question of the current land use recommendation that we're calling major auto repair that's currently permitted within this zoning classification, and whether that should be something that we look to remove from the zoning classification. And the next zoning, or excuse me, the next slide is a map of our city and where we typically find the Tech Flex districts. And you'll see that it's typically outside of Interstate 270, positioned along these major roadways and progressing into the US 33 corridor. They're usually quite large areas of land. And again, they're to promote technology-oriented businesses, but based on their visibility and their desire to promote quality development, we've been asked to analyze whether this is an appropriate use within the zoning classification. So again, this is an existing use. It is permitted with some provisions for outdoor storage that we require to be completely screened. We have had some, I guess, consequences to this requirement in the fact that many of the buildings are multi-story buildings. And so if you're screening it from just adjacent properties, it can still be visible from predominant buildings. So again, we've been asked to omit this use from the Tech Flex district. In consideration with this provision, I've included what we would call an existing use provision that's similar to the Bridge Street district and the West Innovation district, that simply says, if you're an existing business, you continue to operate as a permitted use. We're not interested in creating non-conforming uses. And this allows businesses to grow, expand, and quite frankly, modify their businesses to keep up with quality assurances and not disincentivize those types of processes. So our request is to omit this land use requirement from the Tech Flex district and to include the provision for existing uses. So again, I will look forward to feedback from the commission.
Commission, looking to you. Ms. Kennedy.
So Tammy, so what I think I heard you say is that if there are businesses, for example, I think mini storage was one that was called out in here, that are already in these districts, those would be permitted to continue to operate. Is that what you said?
Yes. So just to be very specific, this land use classification is auto repair. So yes, if there are existing land uses, they would be considered a permitted use.
And expansion of those businesses would be permitted?
They would be.
Okay. Okay. Understood. That was my only question to start off. I think maybe my only question in general. Thank you.
Mr. Grimes.
Yes, I think this is a good change. I think taking the major repair out is a good thing. And with the existing uses, the grandfathering is a typical term used. You don't want to, but you'll give them an opportunity to change as the districts are changing. And they will see the attractiveness of this. And I like the idea of having this technology flex district. The provisions you're making are fine with me. I like it. Thank you.
Anyone else? I concur also.
Maybe I should have started out as one.
Squares right now with no pictures.
Thank you.
Rebecca, you're cutting out a little bit here and there, if you can hear me.
I think she said she wanted a motion for adjournment.
Any comments? Is a little unstable.
If I might just interject, I just wanted to thank the commission for the comments. Again, these are challenging code modifications. So I really do appreciate your comments and your flexibility to work through these.
Well, Tammy, we want to ensure that how appreciative we are of your work, because we know that a lot of effort went into this first draft, and it's somewhat deflating to come before and have so many comments for changes. But know that that is not reflective of the data gathering, but the result of kind of a very challenging job. So thank you very much for your time and for your effort.
Thank you.
Commission, on these three items, four code items, three for these last three, any other comments before we move on to communication? Seeing none. Nikki, does staff have anything for communications for us this evening?
We do. We have one item for communication, which will be on your agenda for March 4th. That will be goal setting. So I would encourage all of you in the interim prior to that March 4th meeting to think about any priorities that you may have for 2021, as well as interests or training that you would request. Tammy Noble is going to be facilitating that goal setting. So I just wanted to give you all some time to contemplate that. But other than that, we do not have any communications.
Thank you, Nikki. And then I just had one item to bring up for discussion, and I mentioned it earlier in the meeting. Snowplows, we've had a very wet last couple of weeks, and snowplows, as I've seen them driving around neighborhoods in and out of the street around vehicles on the roadway. I know that there have been some discussions in the past in different Ohio communities. I don't know that there has been one here in Dublin about off-street parking during snowfall and during snow plowing. So just an item for discussion. We are not the decision-making body on this, but at least wanted to bring it up because I've heard it from other people and I've experienced it myself. And when we're looking at this morning, there was an issue with a school bus who couldn't make it around the pile of snow that was in front of the car that had to reverse on a very narrow street because there's no turnaround opportunity. So all of those things added together looking at the safety of our communities and making sure that we are being kind and considerate neighbors and making sure that we have clear paths for transportation.
Thank you for raising that, Ms. Call, and we can certainly reach out to our contacts of the city to see if this has been contemplated in the past.
Thank you, Nikki. Much appreciated. Mr. Fishman.
I think that was well said. That brings me back to the garage situation. That's why we need to replace parking. But also, I just had a question that I didn't want to ask during the thing, but fences around swimming pools, we talked about 4 feet. I thought there was a state ordinance or something that fences around a pool had to be 6 feet. People are out. Is anybody know anything about that? I noticed we've said 4 feet for a long time, but I drove around today and we've got a couple 6-foot ones in our neighborhood. You know anything about that, Tammy?
Yeah, so Tammy, would you like to answer that, or would you like me to answer that?
We'll gladly let you answer that.
Okay. So first and foremost, the City of Dublin zoning code distinguishes fences and pool barriers. A pool barrier would be a physical separation that looks like a fence. However, it would really be for that life safety component, and that is something that we require. The regulations for the pool barrier are similar to our fence code in that they may not exceed 4 feet in height and may be either open or solid fences. I am not aware of any state regulations that would require a 6-foot tall fence as a pool barrier or safety measure. I do similarly am aware of several instances where we do have pools throughout the city that have a 6-foot tall fence. Many of those fences were installed prior to our existing fence ordinance, as well as the addition of the pool barrier provision to the zoning code. And so we would consider those items non-conforming, and they would not be able to be modified or expanded with the exception of minor maintenance over time. Thad, do you have anything to add to that conversation?
I was just going to note that there are state requirements with respect to public pools. And so if those are the sorts of pool facilities, whether owned by a public agency or by a private club, there are state regulations with respect to how those have to be fenced or separated to prevent intrusion. But like Ms. Martin, to my knowledge, there is no statewide code requirement that would apply to private, as in residential pools.
Okay. Can I make a comment? Can you hear me? You can hear me? What would, over the years in Central Ohio, we've had several incidents where kids climbed over a pool, a fence, and drowned. Okay, and it doesn't seem to make sense that a private pool would be safer than a public pool. If a kid at night climbs over the fence, which is easy to jump over a 4-foot fence, 2 feet seems to make the difference. I wonder why we have that. I am for having the yards, whatever fencing, if you're allowed to have fencing, 4 feet. But if you have a pool, it seems like you'd want to protect that pool from, some child climbing over the fence. But I thought the pool barrier could be 6 feet, but not a fence. It has to be so close to the pool. Not a big deal about it, but go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say that in most instances, the pool barrier, I mean, is a safety mechanism, but is also intended to provide visual separation so that, you know, anyone near the pool would be able to visually intercept it. That being said, with advancements in pool technology, many owners are opting into mechanical locking covers. From a zoning standpoint, that would be a safety measure above and beyond what we would require, which is the pool barrier. And that being said, that safety cover does not alleviate individuals from the pool barrier requirement, but the safety cover may impact the insurance liability of that private homeowner.
So it sounds like there is some interest in at least understanding this more fully. Could we ask that staff take this away and see if there are any other state regulations or if the Dublin Code is in accordance with other acceptable code, understanding that our goal here is safety of the community?
And Nikki,
any other items?
Oh, just very quickly, I'm sorry, I don't want to prolong this, but I do know there's building code requirements that require alarming devices on any type of exterior elevations that face the pool, so that if a door is open, that they're notified of people entering and exiting the building.
That's good. That's good, yeah.
And there is a spacing requirement between the buildings and a residential pool of 10 feet. Again, to go back to what Nikki was saying, to intercept children or residents that should not be eligible for access to the pool. So those are a couple things that might add to the discussion.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Any other items for communications this evening? Seeing none, thanks for spending your Thursday evening with us, and have a wonderful week, and we'll see you next time.
Good night, all.
See ya. Thanks. Another great meeting.